Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 70 Dexterity build using dual rot daggers. So daggers did get a recent buff in patch 1.08. They now deal damage more quickly and have faster recovery time out of their attacks, and in some cases have slightly more range. We'll be using a keen Misericorde, which allows us to infuse it with rot grease, as well as a scorpion stinger, which has scarlet rot build-up just an 8 in the weapon, and these will be at plus 15 and plus 6 respectively. The build will have 40 vigor, 27 endurance, and then 33 dexterity, but we are using Millicent's prosthesis, which gives us an extra 5 points in dexterity. We'll also be using the Rotten Wing Sword insignia, which also boosts successive attacks, however it doesn't boost our dexterity at all. We'll be using the Bullgoat Talisman to raise our poise and the Crimson Amber Medallion to raise our HP, and to bring us to 101 poise we'll be using the Tree Sentinel Greaves, Drake Knight Gauntlets, Tree Sentinel Armor, and Mushroom Crown. I utilized 3 different Ashes of War throughout the showcase. The first one is going to be Storm Stomp, the next one is going to be Endure, and those two do pretty similar things, which is basically allow you to get in some free hits. Storm Stomp will stun lock your opponent, but Endure will ensure that you don't get poise broken, so there's kind of some trade-offs there. Both are pretty solid. And then I also put Quick Step on a lightning infused Misericorde for some invasions, and that was pretty useful for Quick Step backstabs, and also just had a higher damage output for critical attacks. To continue to boost our successive attacks, we'll also be using the Thorny Cracked here. You could opt for the Dexterity Knot if you'd like to get more dex bonus, but since we're able to land so many quick successive attacks, I found this to be the way to go, and it paired well with the Rotten Wing Sword insignia and Millicent's prosthesis. I'll also be using the Crimson Bubble Tear just to restore HP when I'm close to death. The moveset for this build lacks range and poise damage, however this is made up for to some extent by the quickness of the attacks. The neutral L1 comes out with 3 very quick attacks, which can combo with Storm Stomp, which is going to make it really powerful, and that's also going to be working in our favor due to our talisman choice and the mix physic that we're using. It's also worth noting that most of the attacks other than the jumping L1 rather, and the neutral L1 do about 49 poise damage. The neutral L1 does 79, which does have the potential to poise break your opponent, but it's not guaranteed, and the jumping L1 will poise break most people with 123 poise damage in that particular attack. So definitely some options which will poise break your opponent, but for the most part something like Storm Stomp is going to be your best bet. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about the moveset strategy and build. If you do have any questions about this particular build or any others, please let me know in the comments, and I'd also like to mention if you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. But yeah, that's all I've got, and let's go ahead and jump into the invasions. Alright, so jumping into our first invasion, we have a 3v1 in Lane Dell, and I'm able to get both of my buffs off right at the beginning. So I have my Rot Grease on my Misericorde as well as my Mixed Physic. And I am trying to dodge any incoming Black Blade Ashes of War from the one Phantom, but I go for some quick successive attacks on the player with the shield, and that ends up letting me get my successive attack buffs and just get very high damage output on both Phantoms pretty much simultaneously. I do have to grab a quick jumping attack on the Phantom using the Black Blade, but they didn't heal first, and that was kind of a big mistake on their part. So it becomes a one-on-one fairly quickly, and the pace of the fight changes quite a bit. We now have more passive play from this Rune Arc Toast, and I've got to kind of figure out a little bit of a different strategy. So there I go for what I think will be a poise break jumping attack, but they use their Ash of War, which was definitely the right move in that particular moment. So they definitely went out on that trade, and I switch over to a parry shield just because they seem to be playing a little bit predictably, and then bait a parry using a single L1 and then follow that up with an immediate parry attempt. And that usually will work on aggressive players where they get stun locked in the first hit and then immediately go for an attack on you, but you've already queued your parry. So that worked out for a quick parry and riposte. I won't be going for a ton of critical attacks. Well, I won't only be going for critical attacks with this build, but I do have to go for a fair amount given that it's a dual dagger build. Next up we have a 2v1, and I think this was probably the best I played throughout the course of these invasions, just given the types of weapons I was facing and the kind of decisions that I made throughout this particular invasion. I also landed a couple things that, you know, are somewhat frequently missed, so all my free aims seem to be kind of on point for this invasion, and I think I did a good job of just playing it right with keeping my madness kind of low, as well as targeting the right people in the right moment. So I'm not always going to be completely aggressive with this build, and you see the Phantom now taking out their Cypher Pettas, which definitely are kind of a welcome sight in comparison to the Blasphemous Blade, just because they're a little bit easier to punish. I can trade more easily with Storm Stomp, and I don't really have to worry about their Ash of War quite as much as Blasphemous Blade. So they do take Blasphemous Blade back out, and there I was going to go for a jumping attack, but wasn't sure if their Flame of the Fell God would hit me in that moment. So I decided to roll out, and that was definitely the right move, and just kind of one of the moments throughout this particular invasion that I felt was like the correct play, where I made a split-second decision to just play a little bit more defensively in that moment than aggressively, and that's kind of a good balance to strike if you really get that down when to dodge rather than when to be aggressive. And here the Phantom does take out their Cypher Pettas again, and I am really able to punish this more effectively than I was able to punish Blasphemous Blade, and eventually kind of begin the chase down here. So I'm really trying to get that last bit of HP, and do manage to toss a Fan Dagger their way and just finish them off. So now it's just a one-on-one with the dual Vike Spear user, and again, I am keeping an eye on my Madness bar, trying not to get the Madness proc, because I know if they can get a jumping L1 with their dual spears, it's going to be a problem. I managed to get another quick Frostbite on them, which, you know, is going to mean that I'm getting 20% more damage for all my subsequent hits, which will be a lot since this is like a successive attack type build. And there I was hoping for a backstab. You can see I went for an R1 rather than an L1, but didn't get the grab. So that happened a few times in this invasion, but I didn't get too fussed about it. And here you can see they're kind of backpedaling a little bit on their back foot in terms of where their health is at. And there, once again, I just kind of back off and decrease my Madness bar with a Bolus, and then run back in and, you know, try to take advantage of some trades and whatnot. But I get my Madness up again and need to deal with it again. So, you know, just, I'm not in a rush at this point. I'm trying to wait for the right moments, and I see that my strategy isn't totally working out. So I start going for quick step backstabs, and this proves to be much more effective. Quick step backstabs are great against the Great Spear moveset, just because they have long recovery times and are fairly predictable. So I do manage to get one quick step backstab there, and then I get another right here. Neither of them were enough to finish off my opponent. You can note that I don't have the Dagger Talisman equipped for most of the course of these invasions, just because I wanted to prioritize the successive attack play style rather than the critical attack play style. You know, there are lots of people out there that are amazing at parries and backstabs, but this meant to be more of a showcase of the weapon class as a whole. So this was a quick invasion that kind of showed, you know, my experience with the successive attacks, especially at this particular level bracket, where you see a kind of a wide range of HP levels. You know, if somebody is just super aggressive and their teammates aren't backing them up, if you don't get stun locked, you'll be able to just kind of mash L1 and deliver kind of a devastating amount of damage in the process. So that was just kind of a quick one. We'll see some more of those throughout the course of the showcase. But next up we have a 2v1, and this one definitely got off to a rocky start, and it eventually does become a 3v1. So we have somebody with Moonveil and then somebody with Bloodhound Fang, and both of these are pretty hard to punish, especially when there's not much PvE like there isn't in Limgrave, and they're doing a decent job of just kind of getting each other's backs. They're not allowing me to really get off long L1 chains, which is what I'd absolutely like to do with this build. And they're using a lot of their Ashes of War, where my Ash of War is definitely useful, Storm Stomp or Quickstep, but it's very much a way to react to their attacks, and it's much less of a way to kind of pressure them. It's kind of a reactionary Ash of War, which is really useful in a lot of aspects of this particular build, but it's hard to really aggress with Storm Stomp or Endure or Quickstep on a build like this where your poise damage is extra low. So we do have a blue that comes into the world, and now I'm really on my back foot. They're spending, you know, rot spam my way, and it's just not going super well. But I am trying to just get in some damage where I can. There I did go for a backstab, but was stun locked before I could get the R1 to connect. So just really trying to dodge as much as I can and wait for a good opportunity. Here I was hoping to get a parry, missed the first parry because they went for a jumping attack, but assumed correctly that they would go for a follow-up L1, and that was enough for me to get that kill there with a critical. So next, it's just me and the blue. I'm not sure where the host is, but I have a little bit more space here, and I'm not able to parry this because they're using a colossal sword, so I go for a quick step backstab, and that ends up being enough to take care of the blue. So, you know, I was using Storm Stomp at the beginning. It wasn't really working out, so I switched over to Quick Step, and that proved to be better. So just kind of using the variety of this particular weapon class and moveset is going to be important. And then as often as you can grab criticals, you'll obviously deliver quite a bit of damage in that process. So just being a little bit flexible in the moment is going to help you when things aren't going your way. Maybe try a parry, maybe try a Quick Step backstab, maybe try a Storm Stomp. Between those multiple different approaches, you'll probably be able to deliver some damage in the process. So there I did run out of stamina and got hit with the full Lion's Claw Ash of War, so not great, but you know, I'm trying to go for some either endure trades or just get a little bit of damage off in the process, and I do get backstabbed while I'm going for endure, so once again things are not working out, mostly because I'm not able to really stun lock anybody, and I'm trying to go for trades against pretty strong weapons. And I'm also hoping I'll get my rot proc, so there I do manage to get the rot proc, so I have a little bit more damage boosted, and because my damage is extra boosted, I try to play really aggressively, and there you can see the successive attacks are enough to just kind of blender two opponents at the same time. So when you have moments like that, it feels really good for sure, and is just kind of the best case scenario for this particular weapon class and build setup. So next up we have a 3v1, and this was kind of when this weapon class felt bad, where you have, you know, a lot of chip damage just coming from all these different places, and every time you manage to get some damage in, it's usually at the expense of your HP, like quite a big fashion. So I was also kind of in a bad spot because I didn't know this particular dungeon very well, and I didn't, you know, have a good direction to go. I would have preferred to kind of pull everybody towards some PvP or something, but just where I spawned in and my familiarity with the area, excuse me, just wasn't great. And so when I tried to pull people into different rooms, they frequently ended up being dead ends, and that was fairly problematic just in terms of how much HP I lost in the process. You also note that there is that spell being cast, which basically creates an area that does damage over time if you are in it, and that can do quite a bit of chip damage, especially at lower levels like level 70. So I go for a chase down through that mist and don't manage to get the kill, so it just ended up being kind of a huge HP sink in the process, and perhaps wasn't the right play. I wasn't really taking note of how much damage I was taking in the process, and was used to kind of seeing that particular spell at higher levels where it's slightly more negligible. So here I'm just like really backed into a bad corner and pretty much doing everything I can to stay alive. I do finally manage to go after the right phantom. I was kind of focusing on the person with fist weapons and really should have been focusing on the player with the axe, because I was able to take care of them really quickly once I had a chance to, and I was out of heals completely with basically 1 HP there, but managed to get away without taking any damage in the process and finally get the heal from that phantom who died. So now I'm trying to go for a chase down on the player with fist weapons and get some trades with Storm Stomp, just because I've got the successive attack bonus on my side, and you can see that that's still in effect. So I am pretty confident that I'll be able to win out on the trades that I'm kind of in the process of taking with that fist weapon player, and I do end up kind of calling that correctly and manage to take them out. So now it's just a one-on-one. I am completely out of heals, but I'm, you know, able to focus a lot more just on the only player that's here and don't have to worry about so much of the chip damage. So I do manage to land a couple well-timed Storm Stomps and take out the host, but that particular invasion was just kind of when I wished I had a different weapon. dual daggers are definitely fun to play with, but they're limited in some capacities. And when you're dealing with multiple opponents at the same time, having almost no poise damage and really only Ashes of War like Storm Stomp. I mean, you could put on Flaming Strike, but it didn't really work with the rot aspect of the build. But it can just be pretty difficult. So, you know, I think this level bracket is a good one for a dual dagger build, just because it's gonna involve players with slightly less poise than you might see at meta level, and you know, a wider array of HP levels, which is going to be helpful if, you know, you're in a 3v1. If you can quickly kind of dispose of one opponent, you're going to be in a good spot just to bring it into a 2v1. So in this invasion, we have a lot of the Halo Scythe Ash of War spam kind of coming my way, and I'm trying to use those pillars to avoid that damage as much as possible. I do kind of make the decision that I really need to heal rather than trying to dodge, so I'm like all right with taking some hits in the process of healing there. They do switch over to Black Blade, which can sometimes allow for a backstab, but I do switch over to a parry shield and manage to get a crit on the host and finish them off. So a lot of these are just kind of taking some of the chip damage in the process of figuring out what your opponents are going to do and when there's a good window of opportunity to attack them. Obviously, the less chip damage you can take in the process, the better, but for a build like this, you're not going to be able to always be super aggressive, and when you are really aggressive, you can get punished pretty harshly for it. So this next one is, I mean, it's technically a 3v1 because there is a host somewhere, but it functioned much more as a 2v1, and it involves some Moonveil and some magic spam from this wizard here, who does occasionally switch over to a straight sword, so that was definitely my preferred weapon to be fighting against, but really Moonveil was the thing to be looking out for. Eventually I do land a jumping attack on that Phantom, and it's just me and the Moonveil player, and Moonveil definitely was something that I saw a lot while invading, and was not really a welcome sight. It was slightly nerfed in patch 1.08, where the stagger damage on the magic part of Moonveil is less, where the poise damage on the actual slash of the sword is higher. So definitely something I appreciate. I, you know, wasn't a fan of getting staggered from like 20 feet away from the Moonveil magic blade, but I'm not entirely sure if it was enough. It's extremely spammable and has lots of range, which I, you know, don't enjoy to play against so much, which is kind of why you've never seen me make a build out of it. But you know, we are pretty familiar with it at this point, so it's not so hard to reaction dodge it, especially if it's only just a 1v1 situation. So I'm not entirely sure how to approach this for a little while, so I'm kind of changing things up. I switch over to Endure, and just am mostly focused on getting chip damage. I know they're going to run out of FP at some point. How long that's going to be, I'm not entirely sure, but you know, every hit that I can get in the process is going to get me one step closer to proccing Rot and just kind of chipping them down gradually. If I can stun lock them in the process, I'm going to be in a much better spot. So eventually they kind of just neglect healing for a very long period of time, and I'm not sure if they're out of heals or what, but I was able to kind of continuously apply pressure and just manage to get their last bit of HP over kind of a long period of time, and then the host finally does show up. So I'm not sure what they were doing, but once it's actually a 1v1 and I deal with some of the incoming spells that are coming my way, just kind of trying to keep my reaction rolls down, which is so much easier to do when you're facing just a single person versus like a group. And then I switch over to Endure, and they're just not really appreciating the successive attack damage bonuses that I'm receiving. So they're holding up their shield and not really backing off, trying to regroup, which is probably what I would have recommended for them in that situation, and I'm able to get the kill there. So next up we have a 2v1, and this one was fairly quick. It just involved two players on this bridge in the Liurnia, the lakes area, and they give me a friendly wave, which is always nice to see in invasions. We have some madness buildup being sent my way from the kind of madness snipe, and then here I do get hit by the giant dragon hand, but I have a little bit of help coming from the PvE. I'm not really happy with the area that I'm at, especially since there's some dragon incantations in the works. It's not great to be kind of stuck on a bridge, but I managed to kind of avoid most of the stun locks from the dragon attack just from Storm Stomp, and then this player goes for the Sword of Night and Flame, Ash of War, which opens them up for a backstab, which I'm able to kind of one-shot them with. So next up we have a 3v1 in the area outside of the Radahn boss fight, and this ends up being kind of a long drawn-out fight, which I actually quite enjoy on, you know, areas like this, especially if it's not just like a lot of Moonveil or Rot Breath kind of spam coming my way. I feel like it's kind of interesting to use this particular area to chase down like a group that I don't know, especially at lower levels, like they're not usually set up to be maximally optimized ganks, which is really nice to play against. It's just kind of like half gank, half co-opers that you know, add some variety to the invasions that you play. So that first co-oper I did manage to kind of take down with some, you know, quick chip damage, and then I did proc the Rot, which meant that they were getting more chip damage from that, and even though I didn't deliver the blast hit on them, the Rot did the rest. So having that as a pressuring tool is really, really nice. I didn't use any Albinauric pots in this particular build, but that is definitely a good way to go if you are using Rot, because if you do hit an opponent with a Albinauric pot, it's going to prevent them from healing. So the pressure that comes with Rot is just kind of, you know, intensified, and it really makes it more likely that you'll be able to kill them just from the Rot, or they'll kind of, you know, be sprinting away. So it's just not a bad kind of tool to have in your back pocket. But for me, I was just kind of sticking with the frost pots in this particular invasion sequence. So I do manage to get the player with the Iron Cleaver, and then I'm not sure the host, I guess, wasn't happy with me as an invader in the world, so they end up jumping off the cliffside there just into the water, and it ends up being a win. So, you know, nice couple of Rot procs within the course of that invasion. And I wish the host would have been more interested in playing, but that's alright. Next up we have a 2v1, and this involves some Hoarfrost Stomp as well as a lot of straight swords. So we do have the kind of sword and board setup from the host there, and then just a normal kind of dual straight swords, as well as some magic coming from the Phantom. They go for an attack that does leave them open for a backstab, so I try to get that there. And then we do see the falchion, which is definitely cool to see, but I was recently playing with another player, and they were using the falchion quite a bit, just kind of for fun, so I had kind of practiced the parry timing on that and was able to get a quick riposte, so that was pretty nice. Next up, we do have a 2v1, and here this is just kind of another example of a lot of the fights that I encountered, especially at this level, where lots of aggression kind of coming my way and not really understanding that they were really losing out on the trades in the process. So I think that's really important. It's to just kind of keep an eye on how much damage you're doing in the process, as well as how much damage you're taking in the process, and understand if you need to roll out of a trade or not. And having something like the Crimson Bubble Tier allows you to be a little bit incorrect almost with kind of your in the moment trade analysis, but it's pretty important to just kind of see, like, if I keep pressing L1, are they going to die first, or am I? And obviously you're not always going to know, especially if you're invading and you're outnumbered. Like, somebody could show up with, you know, Bolt of Grandsax, for example, and just kind of hit you from out of nowhere. But it is important to see, like, you know, how quickly is your health going away versus how quickly is theirs. So there I did manage to get the Bolt of Grandsax player with a quick guard break and a riposte, and hit them for about 800 damage, which was enough to kind of finish them off. And then we do have another player with Moonveil, but they're kind of trading into Storm Stomp. I definitely appreciated them using the variety of the moveset, but they missed a jumping attack, which ultimately led to a successful L1 combo that did the last bit of their health. And they didn't really have too much poise, which was always something I liked to see on this particular build, where poise damage is low, but if you can stun lock with daggers, you're really doing quite well. So you could use something like Cragblade, but if you're using, you know, two weapons simultaneously, it's going to be pretty difficult to get both of those buffs applied always, and they don't work with Rot, so I didn't go for that route, and putting Cragblade on 2 daggers is just, I feel like it's not exactly within the kind of spirit of the build, I would say. Having just like that's kind of the point of daggers. They have low poise damage and they're fast, so I didn't really go for it there, but that's all right. I think this particular Rot setup was you know, a lot of fun to play with. So next up we have a 2v1, and this started out with some Mimic Veil shenanigans, and was just kind of peaceful and positive for a while. However, one of these players does have the Magma Blaze and decided to mix things up a little bit. So we see some of the St. Trina swords coming in, and I decide that I might have enough HP to go for Endure and just get some quick attacks off, and everybody stays aggressive and just gets stun locked and dies in the process. So it didn't really have to go down that way, but it did, and I just kind of Mimic Veil out of there with a little bit of style. And that was the last invasion of this showcase. We're going to hop into a quick duel and just kind of discuss the weapon as a whole. So I would say that I enjoyed using these, but they're not as good as many of their counterparts for pretty much everything that they do. Something like this weapons are going to be much better. They lack range, but they do have the ability to poise break more easily, and they, you know, you don't need 2 of them, which means their weight load is a little bit lower. Obviously, they don't have the advantage when it comes to critical attacks that these weapons do, but you know, just being able to hard swap when you need to a Misericorde or something is going to put you in a good spot. So overall, I enjoyed using them. I think it was about time that I tried dual daggers, and they're great for applying status procs just because of how quickly you can hit with them. But overall, not an amazing weapon to use, but one that's fun to use nonetheless. As always, if you made it this far, just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate everybody's support, everybody, you know, liking, subscribing, adding to watch time, all that good stuff. If you do have any build recommendations, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to check those out, and definitely do make a point to add those to my list and try to make videos about them in the future. But yeah, that's all I got, and I hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.